Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mohammed Amira, and today I'll be talking about the figure of the terrorist. But before I begin, I really hope that you put aside the, let's say, the judgmental mentality that you might have toward the presenter. Leave that to our doctor. I really want you to concentrate on what I'm going to talk about, the topic. So what about the terrorist? One may ask, isn't this a very general term to talk about? For terrorism is quite general and has a lot of types, local, international, etc. And yes, it's quite general, but because I have limited time, I will narrow down the topic and get into the subject very quickly. And the figure that I'm talking about, that I will talk about, it has actually a birthday, and that is September 11th, 2001. Now, why this day? Because since that day until now, terrorism turned to become a major, dominant, recurrent theme in the mainstream presses, in the politicians' speeches, in the books and articles of many scholars who talked about terrorism. One just needs to open a TV. One just needs to open the TV in order to constantly hear about terrorism, terrorist groups, attacks, and this was actually one of the reasons that I chose this figure. So to the extent that, for example, for a Middle Eastern man, he doubts himself, like when he watches these mainstream media, like, am I a terrorist? Am I included within this one? I'm not, for sure, I'm not a zombie or a vampire. But for him, when it comes to the terrorist, it's quite confusing. But for a Westerner, for anyone who is subjected to the dominant discourse, Western dominant discourse, it's not confusing because he has a figure that is clear in his mind about the terrorist, a figure with clear features. And this is the terrorist that I'm talking about. A figure that was constructed and emerged from behind the words of the politicians and from behind the lines of the books written by many scholars in the West. A figure that is sometimes portrayed, actually, in films and portrayed in even comedy shows, such as the puppet Ahmed the terrorist that is performed by the stand-up comedian Jeff Dunham, as we will see in this video.
Good evening, Ahmed.
Good evening, infidel.
So you're a terrorist?
Yes, I am a terrorist.
What kind of terrorist?
A terrifying terrorist. Are you scared?
Not really, no.
And no?
Not really, no.
How about now?
No.
God damn it. I mean, Allah, damn it. Silence! I kill you!
Ahmed, if you're a terrorist, I would suppose you have some sort of specialty.
Yes, I am a suicide bomber.
So you're finished.
What?
You've done your job.
No, I haven't.
But you're dead.
No, I'm not. I feel fine.
Ahmed, I have something to tell you.
What?
You really are dead.
Are you sure?
Yes.
I just got my flu shot.
You really are dead.
Wait, if I'm dead, that means I get my 72 virgins. Are you my virgins? I hope not. Why? There's a bunch of ugly-ass guys out there. If this is paradise, I've been screwed.
Well, did they say it would be only female virgins?
Holy crap!
So yes, again, because I have limited time, I won't be able to discuss it deeply, but from what we have seen, one can tell how a terrorist has a scary, hairy face, an Islamic name, an Islamic background. But coming back to the figure of the terrorist, how could this happen? How this figure was emerged in the first place, and what are the stages of its construction, and most importantly, why it was brought into being? Now, answering these questions, everything begins with the definition. The dominant Western discourse tended, when defining the terrorism, tended to define it in terms of its perpetrator, the terrorist. For example, the U.S. legal definition of this term, the terrorism, it's a specific kind of violence that is executed by particular groups, or particular kind of groups, particular kind of individuals. What we understand from this, when you put the terrorist in the center, things will twist. It's quite dangerous, by the way. Let's imagine it this way. If we put the terrorism in the center of the definition, then what matters in this case is that whoever does this action that is labeled as terrorism then becomes a terrorist. But the Western dominant discourse, when they put the terrorist in the center, then the matter turns to become whatever this terrorist does, whatever this group of individuals or organizations, for example, that are labeled as terrorists, whatever they do, then it is considered terrorism. You get the point? So, yes, the second step after putting the terrorist in the center of the definition was the delineation and the infusion of features, specific features, into the figure, on all levels, by the way, mentally, physically, psychologically. There's a lot of actually texts that were dealing with this. There are many articles and books. I will use only one article and one book. The article is that is of the anthropologist, French-American anthropologist Scott Atran, who, in his article titled "Who Becomes a Terrorist Today," he says, for example, yes, these young people, yes, in this article he's analyzing the psychology of the Middle Eastern terrorists and takfiris. He says these young people self-mobilized to the tune of a simple, superficial yet broadly appealing takfiri message of withdrawal from impure mainstream society and the need for violent action to cleanse it. If we go through the rest of the article, we will notice the recurrence of phrases similar to self-mobilized, such as self-radicalized, self-selection into terrorism, socially marginalized, newly born, etc. He's using a language that leads the reader to the conclusion that these terrorists are depoliticized, dehistoricized, and dissocialized, meaning that they are operating in a political and historical vacuum. Another quick example from the book of the Jewish Poland-American scholar, that is Walter Lacour, in his book Terrorism, titled Terrorism, he writes, yes, the ordinary criminal, unlike the terrorist, does not believe in indiscriminate killing. He may torture a victim, but this will be the exception, not the rule, for he is motivated by material gain and not by fanaticism. He also writes in another place of his book, political terror tends to be less humane than the varied practiced by ordinary criminals. It is the terrorist's aim not just to kill their opponents, but to spread confusion and fear. It is part of the terrorist indoctrination to kill the humanity of the terrorist. If we go through the rest of this book and also the rest of the article written by Scott Atran and many books and articles written by scholars who took similar path to these two scholars, we will reach to the conclusion. Yes, we will reach to the conclusion that the terrorist is actually a fanatic, dehumanized monster who causes terror and disorder in society. He is constructed as mentally unhinged, possessed by a form of sinister political fever, and an acutely dangerous madness. Again, yes, this is the conclusion until now, but again, because we have no time, what I did next in my paper is that I took this analysis of these texts and translated them in terms of the theoretical frame that we had during the course. I will give two quick examples. The first one regarding the monstrosity, the monstrous side of the figure. The French philosopher Foucault says in his lectures under the title Abnormal, yes, what makes a human a monster is not only that it is an exception to the form of species, but also that it introduces disorder into the legal system. Another example regarding the illness or the madness of the figure, we see the terrorists treated as the same way as the Homo sacer that the Italian philosopher Agamben talked about in his book. So, how so and what is a Homo sacer, one may ask. Briefly, a Homo sacer is a human being who is considered to have an illness that drags him out of the low circle, making him politically irrelevant, and his life is devoid of value. It's more complex actually in the books, but I use this, I put the definition in this way just for the sake of my seminar. But in the same time, this Homo sacer remains under the domination of the politically relevant human that is called by Agamben bios, according to Agamben, yes, and turns to become the sovereign. Now, the owner of the right, the sovereign is the owner of the right to kill, let die, or let live the Homo sacer. Therefore, the terrorist becomes the included exclusion, excluded from the low circle, below the law, and included within the domination and control circle of the sovereign who rises above the law, as we can see here. The terrorist goes out, we said he's like the Homo sacer. He's out of the circle of the law, and the sovereign is above. But the terrorist, even though he's excluded from here, is still included within the control and domination of the sovereign. So yes, a good example would be like, from reality, if we just go back a little bit. What the inhabitants of the White House and the inhabitants of Abu Ghraib. This is like to make things more clear as an example. Yes, and since we now have the sovereign on the table, it is important to mention that it is him, the sovereign, who is responsible for all of this and deals with the terrorists by, for example, waging wars in order to save the society and maintain order. These wars, however, are seen by many other scholars and from a consequential point of view worse than the so-called terrorism practiced by the terrorists, regardless whether these wars were justified or legalized by the sovereign. Again, because of the limited time, I will briefly say that in the next part in my paper, I brought to the table the anthropologist Talal Asad's book on suicide bombing, which shows many contradictions in the sovereign's doctrine and leads us to the conclusion that the real motive of the sovereign is not humanity or morality or self-defense as claimed by, for example, Israel when waging war against Gaza, for example, but rather the motive is merely political, especially if the sovereign is an imperial state. Assad also claims that the real motive of the terrorist is not fanaticism as claimed by the sovereign, but in fact political as well. Talal strengthens his last point the motive of the terrorist, that is political, by quoting a political scientist called Robert Pape, who spent a year compiling a database of every suicide bombing and attack around the globe from 1980 to 2001. And commenting on his results, Robert Pape says, what nearly all suicide terrorist campaigns have in common is a specific secular and strategic goal to compel liberal democracies to withdraw military forces from territory that the terrorists consider to be their homeland. Religion is rarely the root case, although it is often used as a tool by terrorist organizations in recruiting and in other efforts in the service of the broader strategic objective. Yes. As for the last part of my research paper, the sovereign and the terrorist, despite being opposite, seem to have something in common, a relationship in which the existence of each one of them depends on the other. The nature of this relationship, moving forward, became more clear when I brought to the table the German philosopher Hegel and his master-slave dialectic, explained in his book the phenomenology of the spirit. Now, by virtue of the strengths and the legitimacy, the sovereign considered as the monster, while the terrorist considered as the slave, Hegel says that the master becomes a master and the slave becomes a slave after a fight of recognition between both takes place. A fight in which the loser, the slave, must recognize the winner, that is the master. Now, in his interpretation of recognition, Hegel says, I don't think it's here. No, it's the conclusion. Hegel says, to desire the desire of another is in the final analysis to desire that the value that I am or that I represent be the value desired by the other. I want him to recognize my value as his value. In terms of the sovereign and the terrorist, then, when the sovereign desires the desire of the terrorist is in the final analysis to desire that the value that the sovereign represents be the value desired by the terrorist. The sovereign wants the terrorist to recognize his value as the terrorist's value. This, therefore, leads us to the final conclusion that the terrorist, being a value of terror, is in fact a reflection of a greater value of similar type exists originally in the sovereign. Exactly similar to the moon that reflects light, that this is originally stems from the sun. Thank you very much.